Welcome to Thought Crime and Keto Crime, where Tracy does the sleuthing so you don't have to.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today we have the little bonus episode on the Daybells. So let's dive into this. If you would, please, to get this video out there, go ahead and smash that like button down below, leave a comment, support the channel if you'd like. But I am going to basically just be going over the background of this, so I won't be actually dividing this one into parts, but it's also not going to be a long video like the majority of my videos. I can only have limited information on them, but I wanted to go over as much as I could. So let's get into it. We're going to start with Tami Daybell. She was born May 4th, 1970 as Tami Cooper to Ronald and Phyllis Cooper in Pasadena and Anaheim, California. She grew up there with her cousins and basically was part of a gifted class at the local elementary school. She loved going to Disneyland. She put on family shows with her cousins that everybody enjoyed, and she was always kind of an actor and actress, they said. She also enjoyed camping and the outdoors. When they were 13, Phyllis and Ronald moved to Springville, Utah. When I said Tami was 13, just going into junior high school. She would make great grades. She would graduate from Springville High School. She played the drums and the clarinet in the marching band. She also, from an early age, had a huge interest in writing. She would not only write those shows that they would perform for their family and friends, she also wrote for the school newspaper, was the school yearbook editor, and just was well loved by everybody in her class. Even though Chad Daybell went to this very same high school, there was no indication they knew each other while they were in high school. That later happened in college. But Tami loved writing. She loved reading. She would read to her parents. She created her own lending library with her siblings. She had a huge collection of books, and she would actually create her own library with checkout cards and everything. I mean, this was a brilliant little girl, and she would actually allow her siblings to check out books just as you would at the public or the school library. And she even would charge them fines. I guess that's how she paid for more books. I think that's funny. She loved musical movies, and she was just in the drama club. She was just well liked by everyone. They were devout LDS, devout Mormons, and during the summer after graduating, she did attend Brigham Young University in Utah, and there during the summer after her freshman year, she met Chad Daybell. They very quickly fell in love. They both bonded over a love of reading and writing, and they were actually married March 1990 in the Manti Mormon Temple. Chad continued his schooling at BYU, and Tami went to work immediately for the city of Springville, where she worked several stints as a Parks Department secretary. In fact, on her employment, it's mostly city of Springville, and then later on, the publishing company she started with her husband. Those are basically her only employment. So she was, actually the breadwinner for the majority of the time. They started Spring Creek Book Company in July of 2018, and from all accounts, Tami was the bookkeeper, the editor, the CFO, the CEO, whatever you need. She actually kept it afloat so that Chad could publish his own books as well as books by other authors. I listened to an interview from a woman that worked with Chad Daybell who published her account of her own near-death experiences. You will find as we get deeper into this, both Tami and Chad especially had a fascination with being able to communicate with the dead. This comes from a story that Chad was told by his grandfather growing up, but they both believed in the ability to communicate with the dead, which would feed into their mentality, their cult, his cult later on. And so most of his authors had to be, first of all, LDS leaning, and then they also had to believe in that kind of supernatural veil. So I listened to an interview with one certain author, and I'll put a clip of it here, where she was talking about how Tami pretty much was sweet and did everything at the publishing company.
Oh, Tami, she was a sweetheart. I think she was the heart of the business. She just really was good at and really kind and really genuine. He would talk at least twice, probably more, and tell me that she was his soulmate. That he knew her in the pre-existence, and when he met her, that he knew that they knew each other. And I was impressed by that. I thought, wow, they have a really sweet relationship, and that's really tender. And I was impressed by him, by that, and how humble he was and how he, felt about his wife. That's not very common. And so I really was honored to be Chad's friend early on, because I love to see good men,
So we know that she was literally the anchor that held this publishing company together. Now, during the course of their marriage, they have 5 children: Garth Daybell, Emma Daybell, Seth Daybell, Leah Daybell, and Mark Daybell. They do everything from being LDS missionaries all the way to, working there in Springfield, teaching school. So they raise their children to believe in the value of education. And of course, we know that they were married from 1990 up into her death in 2019 under very mysterious circumstances at their home in Salem, Idaho. And in December of 2019, her body would be exhumed to see if there were shenanigans about, because she was buried. She died October 19th, 2019. By October 22nd, she was in the ground. No autopsy was allowed. So it was just quick, and many people did suspect foul play and were trying to find out if anything could be told from exhuming the body. Now, let's get into Chad Daybell. Chad Guy Daybell, born August 11th, 1968 in Provo, Utah. His parents were Jack Daybell and Sheila Daybell, also devout Mormons. He had one brother named Paul. His middle name comes from his maternal grandfather, Guy Chestnut. Now, Guy Chestnut was his mother's father, and it was Guy who would influence Chad's belief in being able to communicate with the dead and see into the other world. Because Guy would relay a story to him where he was approached in the Mormon temple along with his mother and was kind of influenced to do the genealogy of their family, which would show him that he was descended from royalty and very important in this world, so to speak. Okay, so Chad grew up. This belief would be later strengthened by the fact that he believed he had 2 near-death experiences, one at 17 and one in his early 20s, where he was shown glimpses of the spirit world as well as visions of what could happen to the earth or what would happen to the earth. So at age 17, he actually wrote down that near-death experience that he had, and he said he had a near-death experience while cliff jumping. He crossed into another dimension and saw that there was indeed a world beyond this. And then in his early 20s, he was surfing and hit by an enormous wave off the coast of California, and while he was being tossed, he saw future events. The veil was lifted, and he even saw some of he and Tami's unborn children. So a huge belief in the supernatural would follow Chad Daybell for the rest of his life. In fact, almost all of his books were centered on a supernatural view of Mormonism and focused on the end of the world, when the veil between the living and the dead would be lifted. He wrote a series of books that were essentially a Mormon version of Left Behind, talking about the end of days. And I'm actually going to insert a clip of that page on Amazon where we'll look at this further, and also I'll go into how Guy Chestnut's story influenced this writing. So I'm going to drop that right here. All right. Hey everyone. here we are looking at Chad Daybell's Amazon page. As you can see, it's full of books. He has written and self-published through his Springfield publishing house over 25 books, all with an LDS ISK. Like I said, I think you can safely say the mainstream Mormon church is probably broken with him because he did have some outlandish things that they didn't believe in, but they do have an LDS spin, all of them. And as you can see here, some of the various titles that he has, all based on the end times and preparing the people for the end times. This is actually what drew Lori Vallow to him. She read one of his books, became obsessed with it, then later met him on the Preparing the People podcast, and was hooked from that time forth. Now, as you'll recall, when I was going over his background, we talked about how his middle name, Guy, was from his grandfather, his mother's father, by the name of Guy Chestnut. And if you go to the website for one of his books, Standing in Holy Places, you'll actually see a picture of his grandfather, Guy Chestnut, here. Now, a Guy grew up with a widowed mother, 6 children in a small town in Utah, and was kind of sickly. He did eventually join the Navy and become kind of a powerful man, but Guy had supposedly had a vision one day when he was a young man walking with his mom in the local Mormon temple, where a man came up to him and asked his name. He told him his name, asked him who his father was. He told him his father's name, and he said, "I know your father. I've seen him." And this guy went on to suggest that they go to a man named Helper there in that small town in Utah and get their genealogy done. Genealogy is very important in the Mormon church. In fact, my cousin, living in the Bay Area of California, actually did our own family genealogy through the Mormon temple there. So the Mormon religion is highly related to who your ancestors were. But anyway, so this guy suggested he actually trace his lineage back because he is probably related to royalty. And so his mom actually went in her purse to get a piece of paper to write down this guy's name, and he turned to help her, before he could look back, that man was gone. So he never knew the guy's name, but he told Chad from a young age that he believed it was an angel sent from the Heavenly Father to have him do his lineage. They went to this man named Helper and supposedly traced this half of the Daybell family tree all the way back to the royalty of England. And so many people think that Chad's interest in the paranormal and being able to talk to people that have already died, as well as feeding into his belief that people could be possessed and become zombies, all came from that story that his grandfather told him. So that's a little more into the background of Chad Daybell. Hope you enjoyed it. So, all of those 2 near-death experiences and what he had heard from his grandfather was the foundation of one of his first books, Living on the Edge of Heaven, and he would go on different podcasts and talk about that. He also believed that the United States would take the brunt of the end times, that it was actually the place where Jesus would return, and that the United States would pretty much be destroyed in fire and brimstone and would be taken over by what he called zombies, or people that had been possessed by evil spirits or evil demons from Satan. He depicts all of that in his series of books, Standing on Holy Ground and Times of Turmoil, in which he really wrote out what he feared would be the probable ending to the United States, where the United States erupts into fire and brimstone. The United Nations basically enters to keep the peace, and then the United States pushes back, and then World War III ignited. So that's kind of where he was. But even before he got into publishing, he kind of had an obsession with death. Not only the stories of his grandfather, but he and his brother actually paid their way through college digging graves in Springville, Utah. They would dig graves at the local cemetery to pay for their own education. So you have to look at this like he not only had a fascination with a veil, but he had a fascination with death in general. So I think it was a perfect setup for a cult, an apocalyptic cult. And he was long kind of shoved out of the traditional LDS church and kind of went out on his own and started preaching his own version of Mormonism, which he considered the true way, to thousands of people. And he had thousands of people that read his books, that followed him on podcasts, and that he considered him almost their Messiah. And that's kind of what happened to Lori Vallow when they met in 2018. She had already become entranced by his books, and now she met this man. He, from all accounts, very charismatic. He graduated at the top of his class from Brigham Young, majored in journalism, and so he knew how to spin a story. And the fact that he published all these books along the same lines is further evidence of that. But even before the cult-like mentality, his attitude towards other people and just kind of having to be that fanatical, in-charge person was already starting to kind of form. That same author that talked about how great Tami was also talked about Chad in not so great ways. Now, they had a good working relationship, she said. And I'm going to play a clip for you here in just a minute. Had a great working relationship, she said, but she also saw some cracks starting to appear, that Chad wanted to basically change the words of her book to better fit his doctrine. And when she pushed back, he basically pushed her out of the company and kept the rights to her book, and then offered to let her pay him back to get those rights back. So a little bit shady there, you can say. I'm going to go ahead and play that clip here.
You guys, did you write the book together, or did you write it and he basically put it out?
So the lady wrote it, and she was my ghost author. Her name's on the book too, and two of them. And then Chad just kind of edited it and chose the cover and did all that.
What was he like back then working together on this book?
It was interesting. He was very humble. In fact, when we were writing the first book, he called me up one day and says, do you think possibly it would be okay? Do you think maybe we could put a subtitle on the book? I thought, well, that's interesting. Why didn't he just come out with it? I was fine. I didn't really care what he did, as long as he didn't change my story.
And what was the subtitle? I mean, did the subtitle change the meaning, or was it just like a friendly suggestion as to
just a friendly, kind of more of a hint towards the name of the book?
I see. Did he ever talk about unusual religious beliefs or doctrines that he was exploring?
No. I do remember one case when I was writing my second book, or just after my second book, I can't remember, that there's manuscript that was just a bunch of copied. It was probably in the editing stage. I got a hold of that and read through it, and I really felt that there was some in there that was just someone's dream, and I didn't believe it could happen, And so we talked about that, and he actually laughed about it. And I said, this just can't happen. It just logistically can't happen.
Was this something that Chad wrote, or something somebody else wrote?
It's something someone else wrote, and I just got a hold of it. So no, it was he started publishing really kind of not Mormon doctrine stories, just different people's different experiences of stuff. And I just told him there's just something not quite right. And there's a few books that he wrote, and so I just really felt, okay, Chad, and we were working on to put all mine together and take out the LDS stuff, which I was kind of surprised by that, because he was an LDS author. But at this point, I trusted him with my stuff, that he would keep the story, and so I figured I just trusted him more than I should have, I think.
So he wanted to change your writings and remove all of the LDS type references. What is that, to make it so a broader audience might purchase.
Yes, that's why. He wasn't going to change my story. He was just going to change it so it was not so LDS.
Okay. And meanwhile, he's also publishing books by other authors that were not mainstream LDS teachings.
It's about that same time he did.
Your work?
Oh, that has been very upsetting for me, because I finally, knowing that he was publishing other things when he wasn't really honest with me, so I asked for my rights back, and I owed him some money, and so I paid him back, because he said, pay me back, I'll give you your rights back. I paid him back, and he didn't give me my rights back. So I actually went to an attorney, and he read through the contract, and he says, I have never seen a publisher's contract this one-sided. This has nothing good for you in it. And I didn't know what to do at that point. I just thought, I don't have the money to fight him. He did send me $400, but that was after he promised to have, my rights back. And so I figured, gosh, if he sends me $400, he made, 6 times that? I just thought that was not honest. I thought, give me my rights back. That's what I want. I don't want my name attached to what he's publishing. I just am not believing in that, and I want to be left alone.
And so, like a lot of cult leaders that we call, like Jim Jones, for example, we talked about him. They don't like it when their power is questioned. They don't like that at all. So you can say that it was destined to be. When he finally created this cult, he met Lori, and kind of as Lori's friend, Melanie would actually say he lorded over Lori and was absolutely in charge. And so I believe that everything that preceded the immediate disappearance of Tylee and JJ were probably at the bequest of Chad Daybell. Not saying that Lori was innocent, she was just as crazy and had just as much of a hand in it as he did, but I'm pretty sure that them moving to Idaho, Tami's passing away, everything was kind of at his behest and on his timeline. I'm almost willing to go out on a limb and say that, allegedly. Don't come for me. I don't know. I'm just making an educated guess. And so I'm going to be interested to see what happens. What happens now that he's in jail. If those charges will be upgraded and what exactly will happen. But I know this one was kind of short. Not usual for me at all. But as I said, there's not as much information on this case as I would like. I'm going to continue following it and doing updates on it for you. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this kind of summary into the lives of Chad and Tami Daybell. And I'll keep you posted on how this case goes. But until next time, Keto Comic.